I want to begin though by thanking Scott and Sarah's family in particular, not only for being here today, but as I mentioned to Scott on the way in, I was particularly touched even before this legislation came in, but right when we first talked after this tragedy last year, and how in a time when I think any of us, particularly any of us who've never had to go through a situation like this, would have completely understood anger, upset, angry feelings, and instead what I heard immediately was someone who said, not only for himself, but said Sara would want us to focus on this, to bring the community together. In particular, I was struck by how insistent he was in making sure that people knew that the Hmong community in this region, how many good and decent people were part of that, and wanted to make sure that in no way would that form a wedge because of what happened with one person in one situation. And so I just want to say, before we even talk about this legislation, how amazing an impression that left on me, and how when you think about Wausau Metro Strong, it starts when you have a strong person like Scott and a strong family like Sara's, who not just with this legislation but overall sent such a powerful message of goodness and decency at a time when it would have been easy to lash out in anger and hate. And instead, in fact, one of my favorite sayings or quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King was that darkness doesn't drive out darkness, only light does. And hatred doesn't drive out hatred, only love does. And what we saw in those initial days and in the time since with Wausau Metro Strong, with the larger efforts, with all the activities, is really this family and in turn this community showing, revealing the light, and in turn the love that can make a community and in turn even a family stronger. So to Sara and Scott's family, and Scott in particular, thank you so much for that. As was mentioned by both of your state lawmakers who've done a phenomenal job, not only just on this, but Jerry and Pat, thank you, and John, thanks for joining us, really as a representation of how this is the sort of thing you want. Lawmakers from both parties, from both chambers, setting aside what there might be in terms of other differences and realizing this is not a partisan or even a geographical issue. This is just an important issue to deal with, and as was mentioned, it's unfortunate that it took a tragic situation to bring it to light, but just how important it is to protect people who are looking out for protecting others. You think, obviously, when you think of law enforcement, you think about it in this courtroom with a judge, you think about it others, but Sara and others now like her are out there every single day protecting families and children in particular, and this gives one more tool to send a message that those individuals who are out there on a limb are going to have from society and from the law specific protection to say to anyone who would do harm, be it in the most tragic or even the most limited of cases, that they do so. The law's been changed, and that there's clearly a deterrent being put in place in terms of a felony charge that's attributable to that. I was thinking as we came in today, long before I was your governor, I had the honor of serving, as many here today in this courtroom have, in county government. And one of the distinctions that always struck me was when I went in the Capitol this morning, I don't go through any metal detectors. In all my years being the county executive, I went in and out of a courthouse with metal detectors. And people don't understand the reason why. Was it 9/11? Was something else? No, it has nothing to do with that. If it did, your state's capital would have metal detectors. It's not to protect elected officials. It's not to protect others. It's because in our courtrooms, not just the one I worked in, but many others across the state, particularly in courts dealing with family and children-related issues, there unfortunately are such passions and such emotions that oftentimes people go to great lengths and even take it beyond. And so it is that much more important, even thinking about coming here today, about making sure that those individuals who are looking out for the best interest of those children and of those families have the absolute protection through the authority granted in the statutes of the state of Wisconsin to say that for those who are doing this, we should ensure that there's no harm done to them, again, in any stage, not just in the most extreme. And so this is one more way of validating the important hard work they do and sending a message, not just in these courtrooms, but across the state, that we're giving one more tool to hopefully add to their protection from this point forward. So it is an honor to be here today. I thank Jerry and Pat not only for, I got many questions when I was in Wausau along the way, and it was real easy. I said, of course, I'm gonna sign this, and I'm optimistic it'll get through the legislative process. But they in particular asked me if I'd sign it here. This is the only bill we're signing today. In fact, Jerry came up with me and is going back because we've got to go back for the State Building Commission. But we thought it was important specifically to do this one bill, this one site, on this one day, to draw attention to this, not just to the good work being done in this community, but to send a message across the state that the law has changed, and we're taking one more powerful step to make sure we protect those who are protecting others. So with that, I'll invite Scott and the family and the lawmakers to come up and join me for this.
You stand next to her more than any other.
They want to be up close. Yeah. They can come up close, yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, but once you come over here,
We'll block it. Yeah. Yeah.
stand next to that.
No, girls, see, the key is people, a lot of times students will say, why do you have to get a pen, don't you have enough ink, because I'm gonna give a pen to everybody. So it's April, I almost need a longer break today. Make sure everybody gets a pen. I need a longer break. There are a lot, that's right.
I'm sure you have enough.
Is there? No, it is the law.